Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Ondřej Ditrych. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the next panel, the crisis in Ukraine and the security aspects of defense cooperation between Germany and the V4 countries. The ongoing Ukraine crisis has changed the rules according to which European security is being played. For NATO member states, it has given rise to the spectre of hybrid warfare and more intensified political warfare, having populations as target, enfeebling or seeking to enfeeble states and polarize member state societies. The NATO's response has been measured. The Spearhead Force, the Spearhead Rapid Reaction Force plan seeks to address the more kinetic aspects of the hybrid warfare to increase deterrence and resilience of NATO member states. But a lot of thought arguably has to be done on how to forge a more comprehensive and multi-layered counter strategy against the threat that NATO member states are now feeling to be facing. And we are very fortunate to have an array of excellent speakers who will share their views on Central European views on this new situation against the background of existing frameworks for security and defense cooperation in the region of Central Europe, covering the V4 and Germany. And these speakers are in alphabetical order: István Balogh, Director General of the Department for Security Policy and Non-proliferation with Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade, Hungary; Dušan Fischer, Junior Research Fellow at Slovak Foreign Policy Association in Bratislava; Jireš, Defense Policy Director at Ministry of Defense of the Czech Republic; Overhaus, Acting Deputy Head of the Research Division Americas at Stiftung Wissensschaft and Politik in Berlin; and last but not least, Marcin Terlikowski, Head of the European Security and Defense Economics Project at the Polish Institute of International Affairs in Warsaw. We will now do a round of initial remarks and speakers will deliver them in alphabetical order, after which we will open the floor for a more general debate. So let me give the floor to the first speaker, Mr. István Balogh.
Thank you very much. First of all, I'd like to say thank you to the organizers for inviting me and providing me with an opportunity to be here in front of you today. Last year I was lucky enough to have been invited to a brief workshop on the same topic, and I'm glad that I was invited back again. So that being said, I'll move over to the topic of my presentation. First of all, just a couple of general comments. Since I'm dealing with security policy instead of defense policy, which is with the MOD of Hungary, I'll be focusing on a more general political context, and it's going to be more security policy oriented rather than defense policy, given my position. Now, first, just a few general comments. The events that have been taking place in and around Ukraine over the past 12 months have been clearly strengthening the relations among Poland, Germany, and France in particular, and it has revitalized the Weimar Triangle, in a way. Foreign ministers of all of those three states were involved in the negotiations between former Ukrainian President Viktor Yanukovych and his opposition. And these negotiations proved to be one of the cornerstones of support for political change in Ukraine, I should say. Now, this could have meant that the security situation in Ukraine could become sort of a natural ground for cooperation among the Visegrad 4 countries. But we all know this isn't exactly how this has happened. And the reason for that is that this opportunity has not been subsequently transformed into an increased foreign policy role of the Visegrad group in the EU's policy towards Ukraine. Now, this could partly be explained by the fact that in the aftermath of the illegal Russian annexation of the Crimean Peninsula, the Visegrad countries pursued somewhat different strategic approaches, and they started pursuing slightly different strategies. It is quite understandable, for example, that Poland took a very tough stance regarding Russian actions, but the overall sense was that, in Warsaw's opinion, instruments of cooperation and negotiations have been of little use. This is not to say that Poland hasn't been supportive of the need for a political solution, something that has been voiced by the three other Visegrad group countries, and perhaps they have been slightly more vocal in voicing the need for a negotiated settlement, a diplomatic solution, and a political solution at that. Although all Visegrad countries agreed that the illegal annexation of the Crimean Peninsula must have its consequences, our countries' opinions have somewhat differed and diverged concerning the effectiveness and the possible impact of the EU's economic sanctions against Russia. Nonetheless, we all accepted them, and Hungary has been voicing that we accept sanctions in order to keep the unity of the EU, which is a very important statement. However, concerning steps taken in the framework of the EU's common security and defense policy, all of these countries, and of course Germany, were in favor of setting up the civilian advisory mission in Ukraine, EUM, which will be assisting the civilian security sector reform by supporting the elaboration of revised security strategies and promoting reform in that specific sector. The mission will be launched on the 1st of December, which we very much look forward to. All the more so because we have a Hungarian head of mission over there, Kalman Mizsei, a very well-known expert in Hungarian diplomatic circles. Now, also in light of the ongoing developments in Ukraine, security and defense cooperation among the We4 takes up, of course, special relevance. And we clearly see the advantages of such an approach. On the one hand, of course, the financial challenges of security and defense policy are significantly easier to manage. And on the other hand, cooperation offers mid-sized countries and small EU countries the opportunity to obtain greater weight in order to realize their national interests. Now, we have, of course, identified a number of fields and concrete and specific projects for political and practical cooperation, and we stand ready to explore additional areas bringing added value to the further strengthening of European defense as a whole. And one of the most tangible results of this cooperation is, of course, the EU battle group concept, the BG concept, to go on standby in the first half of 2016. This is coming along fine. We have been making significant progress. We are looking forward to next year's Trident Juncture, which will be a milestone in qualifying the forces that make up the BG to make it eligible by 2016. Now, eligible to go on standby by 2016. Now, in terms of expanding the We4 defense cooperation to Germany, we are very much open to discuss any possible projects or specific areas of cooperation. As of yet, we think it's quite difficult to identify specific areas where we can cooperate. Nonetheless, I should say that we are very much open to have sort of a joint debate together with Germany, a strong ally, to discuss and explore areas of possible cooperation. That being said, it's also important to use the structures that we already have. And one of the important features of the We4 is that we don't have many structures, except for the International Visegrad Fund. But it is pretty fluid, and that's why it has been successful, in a way. So we would be for a solution when extending this to Germany is to explore areas where we have already been cooperating. And I'm sort of a little bit wandering into the area of defense policy, and I'll leave that up to the defense policy experts, but maybe, you know, there's some maneuvering space for possible cooperation in certain structures where we are all involved. For example, we have the network of centers of excellence within NATO, and there's a number of centers of excellence where all V4 countries and Germany are also included. So maybe you can use those sort of islands of cooperation to extend perhaps the V4 to include Germany. But of course, we need to be more specific than that, and we need to explore the possibility of specific areas. We all agree that Europe should assume a greater responsibility in the maintenance of international peace and security, and to successfully live up to these expectations and expectations of our international partners, we need to adapt to the rapidly changing security environment, defining the EU's interests and protecting strategic priorities. It is quite necessary to provide strategic guidance to the EU's external actions, and this was also underlined by the recent events in the EU's neighborhood. Besides Ukraine, of course, the situation in Syria and Iraq, and also Libya. While all V4 countries are equally concerned about the security policy consequences of Russia's behavior and its long-term implications on Europe's security, the V4 members had different priorities concerning security-related steps. Poland has been very vocal, for example, about a permanent NATO presence on its soil. While the other three countries, while fully supporting, of course, NATO's Readiness Action Plan, already mentioned in today's keynote speeches, we are still considering the usefulness of permanent hosting of NATO troops. Nonetheless, we understand that we have a slightly different perception, and we understand that our allies in the East have fears that fully need to be recognized, and we support them in their endeavors to actually implement the Readiness Action Plan, which Hungary fully supports, of course, and we will be providing our share of taking up this burden. Now, no doubt that NATO and the EU will have to draw their lessons from the Ukraine-Russian conflict and adapt accordingly. It is too early to say that, for example, NATO's strategic concept needs to be changed. But we cannot fail to notice that, of course, Russia's behavior is challenging the post-Cold War security architecture. Regrettably, the assumptions that the NATO and EU-Russia cooperation would develop into a true strategic partnership have proved somewhat illusionary. This has been also mentioned by today's keynote speeches as well. The possibility of a more active German V4 cooperation in the Ukraine crisis is not only perhaps hindered in a way by different priorities among the V4, but also by a slightly different perspective of Germany. It is important to note that the German defense minister, Ursula von der Leyen, when taking office, it was mentioned that there would be a larger and a more robust role for Germany in the field of defense. But afterwards, there was sort of the recalibration of those statements. That being said, we very much support a greater role for Germany in European defense. We would very much love to see that, and we are very much open to, as I said, discussing further options for including Germany in V4 defense cooperation project. I think this is more or less all I wanted to say. I have a lot more thoughts on this, but I think I will I will let others speak as well. Thank you very much for your attention, and I hope we'll have a great and interesting and fruitful discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, István, for offering the view from Budapest, and I will now pass the floor to Dušan. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ditrych, and thanks for the kind invitation. I think this is a very timely event. I think Friday will mark 1 year exactly since the protest on Maidan Square broke out last year, and we also in the midst of V4 leaders visiting countries like Slovakia or Czech Republic. In Slovakia we had a visit by President Poroshenko, by President of Ukraine, and this is a month after the ground paper exercise, which included more than 1,000 forces from armed forces from all V4 countries and the United States. So thank you very much. I would like to make a little disclaimer, as I am representing here Slovak Foreign Policy Association. My views, the views I'm going to present are strictly my own, and I will begin with the history of V4-German relationship. Then I will talk about obstacles of cooperation, and on a lighter note, I will then introduce some opportunities for the future, which we can build on. German leadership, and it was stated in the keynote speeches in the morning, it was very important especially in those late or early and late 1990s when it was invoked debates on future Euro-Atlantic integration, and Germany was a strong leader on having political and economic stability in the region, and therefore called for Euro-Atlantic integration for the V4 countries, or at the beginning just V3 countries. Another role of the leader was in 2008 when the economic crisis or the financial crisis hit Europe and the United States and pretty much every single country in the world. Germany was also stepping in as a leader in Europe and in the Eurozone. There are, however, some setbacks and some obstacles of cooperation, as István already said, and I agree completely that it's complicated to say right now that in which areas, on what basis we can cooperate right now or tomorrow between V4 and Germany. We should build on those relations that we acquired throughout the time, and we should propose some other ideas, but it's very complicated to be specific, but I think that's the reason for this kind of debate, so I'm hopeful for it. So one of the obstacles is seeking the purpose for the V4 after 2004, because the Visegrad Group goal was Euro-Atlantic integration of all 4 countries, and since we all joined EU and NATO, there's been a lot of lacking agenda, if I may say, for the last 10 years. In terms of cooperation and Euro-Atlantic integration. I think we haven't we haven't used our full potential. Another reason, I'll be more specific, it's complicated procurement. If we compare procurement in terms of when we're talking about defense cooperation or security cooperation, there's a lot of differences between NATO and European Defense Agency procurements. It's very complicated, it's almost impossible for one company from Slovakia to procure something in the EDA. It's very complicated. István already mentioned also domestic policies of the V4 countries. We all recognize that what's going on in Ukraine, and I'd like to call it Russian-Ukrainian crisis because I don't like to call it Ukrainian crisis. We all recognize what's going on there, but somehow we have different responses towards Russia and the Russian leadership in Europe. We have different multilateral and multilateral priorities. Weimar Triangle includes only Poland. Eurozone, for example, only includes Slovakia. So there may be differences in this kind of cooperation. There is a decline in approval of the V4 group among Germans. There was a line was on the rise during the 1990s, early 2000s. Now now it's on decline. There's a difference in threat perception among V4 countries and Germany. We have different threats. There's very few threats that are common for the whole V4 group. There are different trends for each country, and therefore we somehow develop defense capabilities, because for different threats we have to have different capabilities. But on the positive side, and there are a lot of opportunities for the future, one being the post-ISAF cooperation, defense cooperation. As you all know, that the ISAF operation in Afghanistan is ending by the end of this year, and there will be a lot of troops with a lot of training and practice coming back to our states, and we should build on that. There is an opportunity in V4 neighbors. There are many countries that are neighboring V4, namely Austria, Croatia, Slovenia, Serbia, Romania, Ukraine, for that matter, Lithuania, and those countries should be also involved in the cooperation. And of course, battle group, already mentioned the battle group concept, very important for cooperation. And one other area is energy security, which is also very important and very timely in these days. And since we are after lunch, I took the advantage and I use this abbreviation. It's called PI, and it's procurement, information, and education. And those are the three levels that I see the future and the most important opportunity for the future in cooperation between V4 and Germany. So it's procurement, information, and education. Now, briefly talk about the role of Germany on this cooperation, or the role of Germany in V4 itself. There's been a lot of saying in the morning about leadership, and it was mentioned, and but I would call Germany's leadership as undeclared leadership, because I don't think that Germany sees the role of a leader as we see it in the V4. However, the having a non-partisan arbiter is very important for the V4 countries, because whenever we cannot agree on something, we have someone from abroad that we have common history with, that we have common security threats perception, and Germans can help us decide on some matters. And V4 should serve as a strategic region, not a single partner. I think one of the greatest advantages of the V4 is that we don't have a institution. There is no institutionalization except the IVF, the International Visegrad Fund. And so V4 should be seen as a strategic region, not a single partner, but it's still on the platform of cooperation, the platform of discussing issues. That should be the role of V4 in Germany. And I think I have a couple of minutes left, so I will talk about what does the V4 have to offer, and what is the role of Slovakia, since I'm here for the Slovak part of this panel. I think we can offer the experience that we have, and I'm now talking about Ukraine, the experience we have from Euro-Atlantic and transatlantic integration. Of course, the situation in the 1990s was totally different from the situation that is now in Ukraine. This was far from it, but still we can do some experience sharing towards that country. But on the other hand, we should be very cautious with promises. We should be able to speak out that whatever path Ukraine will choose, it will take quite some time to achieve some goals, some visible goals, and they should be prepared for that. And the regional role is the last thing. 3 out of 4 countries of the V4 border Ukraine. I think there's a big opportunity right there. And coming back to Slovakia, as I mentioned at the beginning of my speech, it's a month since the ground pepper exercise, and we should work on this, and we should allow more exercise and training in Slovakia. We have a lot of capabilities. We have a lot of training exercise sites. We should use them properly, and I'm talking about NATO or Common Foreign Security Defense Policy of the European Union, the same thing. And one thing I see great opportunity for Slovakia and for Ukraine as well is a cross-border cooperation in terms of security sector reform or including police and crisis management, and also building civil society and educational structures which would benefit for all the V4 countries. Okay, and so this is my speech, and I yield my time if there's some left to discussion, so I hope you have a fruitful discussion after this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dušan. A lot of ideas there. Let us now hear from Jireš from Czech Ministry of Defense. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me. It is always a pleasure to be able to actually free myself from my office desk and actually go somewhere where people are and actually I can talk to them. Actually, I am headed for Berlin tonight to meet my counterpart, my German counterpart, tomorrow to discuss Czech-German and V4 German defense cooperation. So this is a very good way of how to prepare myself better for my meetings tomorrow. Just a few remarks. To be honest, today we are in a rather different political environment in the V4 and in Europe generally compared to just a year ago. We are now facing a serious question of whether the V4 defense cooperation has any practical future at all. And I would say that actually there are two reasons for that. First, so far we haven't been really able to launch practical cooperative projects in capability development. I mean, we have been talking about this very intensively over the past 2 years. It has been very high on all the 4 countries' defense policy agendas. We have adopted on the level of ministers, on the level of prime ministers, a bunch of declarations and documents over the past 2 years, but actually we haven't been really able to even launch, let alone to complete some practical cooperative projects in military capability development. And actually we have a few unfortunate disappointments or failures from the past few weeks. Just to illustrate this point, we spent much of the past year talking about joint procurement of mobile air defense radars within the Visegrad group, and this project has failed. Actually, the failure of the project was announced 2 months ago, if I'm correct. Moreover, it seems that actually we are not really capable of launching tangible practical cooperation even in the, so to speak, softer cooperation areas, such as military education. There is a promising project on the way in which the 4 defense colleges, the 4 national defense colleges would cooperate, offering joint courses for the Ukrainian military, for example. And again, we haven't really been able to launch that project, even though we have been talking about it for a very long time. And giving just these 2 examples, I don't want to assign blame to anyone, because I am all too well aware of the fact that actually the reasons for failure when it comes to these particular projects actually have been rather complex, and it is a mixture of a lack of political will in a concrete situation, going beyond you know, political pronouncements or declarations. There is a bureaucratic resistance on the part of many parts of our defense sectors. There are competing interests when it comes to our defense industries. There is still a great degree, and I'm afraid I have to say that, still a great degree of distrust between the militaries, especially, because we may have very good relations on the level of politicians and even civilian defense officials, but I would say that this rosy picture actually is not that rosy any longer when we look at the militaries. First, militaries by definition tend to guard jealously their sphere of operation and action. And secondly, there are some unfortunate experiences from the past. And soldiers usually have longer memory than civilian defense officials. So, as I said, there have been really complex set of reasons why these practical initiatives and cooperative projects have failed. But I mean, after 2 years of intensively talking about it and trying to come up with practical projects, it really starts to be suspicious why we haven't been really able to launch much of practical projects. And the second reason for my initial question that, or the initial problem I posed, that we now face a serious question of whether the V4 defense cooperation has any practical future at all. The second reason is that now, thanks to different reactions, different political approaches to the Russian war against Ukraine, we actually now have disagreements on the political level as well. So this practical inability of launch practical cooperative projects is now complicated by disagreements on the political level. If you look into this issue really honestly, you have to start worrying about what Poland especially will take from all this experience. It is more than imaginable that Poland might start losing its patience with V4. Poland now can have some very different priorities that might be seen as more pressing by Poland, and most of them stem from the September NATO summit in Wales, of course. So now actually we are facing a very urgent need of implementing the NATO-Wales summit decisions, and I'm quite sure that this is the top priority for Poland. And if V4 countries, if other V4 countries are not helpful in implementing the NATO summit decisions in a proper way, then of course it would be more than natural that Poland would start feeling distanced from V4 cooperation. Poland now faces an urgent need to implement the readiness action plan properly. Poland now might see itself not really being a part of the V4 any longer, but rather being a part of the REP countries group, meaning countries that actually will be directly or should be directly affected by the readiness action plans, individual issues like establishing command and control elements on the territory of Poland and the 3 Baltic countries, and so on and so on. Unfortunately, it seems that V4 must now go back to basics, and here Germany, apart from Poland, can be of an important factor. And by saying that the V4 has go back to basics, I mean that maybe for the coming years the biggest challenge and biggest task for the V4 cooperation will be keeping its member countries reliable, Western-oriented, liberal democracies. Unfortunately, compared to the situation just a year ago, as I said, we cannot be completely sure about this nowadays. And here, of course, Poland will play, or at least should play, a crucial role, as well as Germany. Both countries, which are of substantively bigger weight and importance than the 3 smaller V4 countries, so both Poland and Germany can play a role of disciplining powers. Germany can contribute, or should contribute, to keep all the V4 countries in the NATO and EU mainstream. And defense cooperation, practical defense cooperation, can actually be used as a vehicle for achieving this, as a vehicle, as a tool, helping Poland and Germany to keep the three smaller Visegrad countries in the EU and NATO mainstream. Now going very briefly to the outcomes of the NATO summit in Wales, because actually the Wales summit decisions provide us with a lot of opportunities of how to link Germany and the V4 countries in practical cooperative projects. Of course, there is this whole big issue of affiliation of forces to regional core headquarters. The Wales summit elevated the Polish headquarters in Szczecin into a position of a regional collective defense hub. Actually the Wales summit said that the Szczecin core headquarters should be the primary headquarters responsible for collective defense in the alliance. And of course this provides the V4 as well as Germany a tremendous opportunity to link themselves to Szczecin and use that joint headquarters or joint facility to promote practical regional projects, be they in capability development or joint training and exercises and so on. This is the same with the German-based core headquarters, such as in Minster. The Czech armed forces actually will be affiliated to two core headquarters, one in Szczecin and one in Minster. So this is again sort of a channel through which Germany can be more closely bound with the V4 countries, while the opposite, the V4 countries can be more closely bound with Germany. And last but not least, a few words on the very German initiative launched last year, which is the Framework Nations concept. From the outset, we have understood the Framework Nations concept, besides its practical role of essentially a catalyst for capability development, as a very useful tool for German domestic consumption or use. We have always pretty well understood that actually the Framework Nations concept should be one of the ways of how the German defense establishment actually would try to convince the German public that it's okay for Germany to be active in European defense and security. Because we all know that actually there are still huge reservations, and many of us probably come across a reaction from our German friends and colleagues that when they react in disbelief essentially to our suggestions that yes, we really would like Germany to play a bigger role in European defense and security. Very often the reaction on the part of our German friends and colleagues is, really? Are you serious? So we have to really stress this, yes, we are serious. We want Germany to be more active in European defense and security. And because we know of these tremendous historical ressentiments and reservations on the part of German public, we know that the Framework Nations concept actually was intentionally designed by the German defense establishment a year ago to help overcome these reservations. So, well, fair enough. If actually it succeeded in this task, it would be perfect. But apart from that, of course, it should be a tool for practical regional cooperation in military capability development. And we have been working with Germany very closely since summer last year to implement this initiative. Unfortunately, there haven't been much of a practical progress yet, but I'm sure that actually based on the results of the NATO summit in Wales, the process of implementation of the Framework Nations concept will now be speeded up. What is important about the Framework Nations concept and why it is actually different and perhaps, hopefully, more useful than previous similar initiatives in NATO focused on regional cooperation in defense capacity building, is that actually it is to be directly linked to the NATO defense planning process. Unlike, for example, smart defense projects, curiously enough, a smart defense initiative which was launched by the former NATO Secretary Rasmussen was not actually directly linked to NATO defense planning process, whereas the German initiative of Framework Nations concept should be. So what this means in practice, it means that those capability shortfalls identified in the official NATO defense planning process should be addressed and, if possible, filled through the Framework Nations concept. So actually, the areas on which Framework Nations concept approach should be focused, and on which 10 different countries, including the Czech Republic and Germany and Poland, agreed in September in Wales, actually, should include logistic support, chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear protection, delivering firepower from land, air and sea, and deployable headquarters. So essentially these are the capability shortfalls identified in the official NATO defense planning process, and the plan is that the Framework Nations concept should actually address specifically these capability shortfalls. So I believe that it will come to some tangible cooperation, and Framework Nations concept really is a good way of how to link more closely Germany with the V4 countries, because it is an ideal opportunity, an ideal tool actually to promote regional cooperation that includes Germany in a very, very practical and down-to-earth way. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jan. Having painted not exactly a very rosy picture where the V4 is now, you've spoken a lot about practical venues of cooperation with Germany, and therefore it is great that we can have an immediate rejoinder from Marco. Please, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Ondřej. Well, my picture won't be that much rosier either, so I'm sorry for the two pessimistic notes in a row. But I would like to thank also the IIR and the Konrad Adenauer Foundation very much for the kind invitation to this conference. I would like to pick up on what State Secretary Kostoval said or brought up in his keynote address to this conference about German willingness and ability to lead or to play a leadership role in multilateral defense cooperation, and generally speaking, but also more specifically in Central Europe and with regard to the V4. And actually, I am very skeptical to the extent that Germany has both the ability and the willingness to play that leadership role, at least in the area of defense cooperation. And I would like to briefly summarize or discuss 4 reasons for my skepticism. The first is not necessarily or not directly linked to German behavior, it's more about the context in which German security and defense policy is taking place, the changing European context, which is really characterized by divergences between or among the group of Germany and the V4. I would like to look also before the Ukraine crisis. I mean, the fact that the Ukraine crisis itself has driven a wedge into the V4 countries, or has stressed differences among the V4 countries in how to deal with Russia. That has already been brought up by several speakers. So I can definitely share that perception. But there is something that goes further into the past. Starting at least with the sovereign debt crisis and the financial crisis, where, as you all know, most countries in the European Union, but also in the United States and elsewhere, had to significantly cut their defense budgets. The problem is, I think, that these cuts have also brought again on the surface the issue of burden sharing, not as traditionally only between the United States and European countries, but also burden sharing issues within the European Union context, because generally speaking, smaller countries had to cut their defense budgets relative to their expenditures more dramatically than the bigger ones. And so we have also an increasing level of burden sharing problematic between the bigger and the smaller countries in the European Union. So taken together, this taken together also with the split over the Ukraine crisis brings me to the point that the European context has become less conducive to leadership role in general, be it Poland or be it Germany or whoever, because the countries are just more split in defense political issues. So that's the first reason. The second reason for me being skeptical relates more generally to the debate in Germany about foreign and security policy, because I think Germany is really, again, in a soul-searching exercise of its role in foreign policy. The speeches of our federal president Joachim Gauck and also of our foreign minister Steinmeier and defense minister von der Leyen have been touched upon, have been mentioned already, the speeches during the Munich Security Conference at the beginning of this year. And then we have also, apart from the speech, we have an ongoing review process in the German Foreign Office called Review 2014. There is the debate now, as Ursula von der Leyen, our defense minister, has announced there will be a new white book on German security and defense policy, probably published sometimes in 2016. So there's a lot of debate and soul-searching going on, but I think that this debate is currently very much esoteric. It's very abstract, it's very general. There's a lot of talk about new responsibility, sometimes also new power is added, new power, new responsibility. New power because of Germany's important role, which is hard to deny, I guess, in the area of dealing with the financial crisis and the fallout of the Eurozone and sovereign debt crisis. So the question then is whether Germany can translate that economic power into more power also in security and defense policy. And so this is a very general debate, and I fear that the debate has not yet really translated into operational goals or into something that is more operational and more tangible. Of course, the mixture is the picture is very mixed. If we look at the political role that Germany has played during the Ukraine crisis or dealing diplomatically with the Ukraine crisis, and this has also already been mentioned, the picture is probably more rosy because Germany was active with France and Poland in diplomatic area, but I would definitely say in the defense area, and when it comes to Germany's future role in shaping NATO and the common security and defense policy, there's really a lack between statements on responsibility in Germany and efforts to translate it into concrete action. So that's the second point on the German debate about its foreign and security policy role. Third point, crisis management, performance, and procedures on the side of Germany. Well, Germany has, just as a matter of fact, currently about 3,000 military troops deployed abroad as of November 2014. Most of them are deployed in Afghanistan, still Afghanistan, so the ISAF mission, and the second largest with roughly 700 troops is Kosovo. But what I see or what I observe is that the political restrictions in terms of military crisis management have become more severe, have become tighter. So when I remember back when I started to study German defense policy at the beginning of the 2000s, for instance with regard to the defense policy guidelines 2003, there was a debate, or there were also actual decisions being made to ease the restrictions on the use of German armed forces in terms of geography, in terms of responsiveness and timing, but also in terms of the functional scope, so whether or what kind of missions German troops can engage in. And the relaxation of these political restrictions has been taken back. The political restrictions are getting tighter again. We can debate the reasons for that, and we can also debate whether this is good or bad. Not everybody says it's bad, of course, but the political restrictions are becoming tighter. Some people in the German press, quality press, already speak of a new German pacifism. I think that's grossly exaggerated, but it doesn't change the fact that political restrictions on defense policy and on military crisis management specifically are more visible. And German reactions to the crisis in Libya, Mali, and Syria are a testimony to that fact. And that brings me to the fourth point, which I would like to mention, on resources of defense policy, resources invested in defense policy in the German context. Well, it is quite remarkable, I would say, that Germany was one of the countries, especially one of the bigger countries, that did not significantly cut back its defense budget in the wake of the 2008 financial crash. So there were discussions to substantially reduce the German defense budget between 2008 and 2010, and that didn't happen. So as a matter of fact, specifically also if you look at the midterm financial planning between 2013 and 2017, the German government has kept the German defense budget more or less constant, even inflation adjusted. But the problem is that keeping the defense budget constant doesn't do the job anymore. It's not sufficient for several reasons. The most important reason, I guess, is a development that is witnessed by all other EU countries and also by the United States, namely that personnel costs have risen incredibly, or have risen sharply. And the situation is even more pronounced in Germany because Germany has just de facto abolished conscription and translated or transformed its armed forces into all volunteer forces. And there was the calculation in the German government that this would relatively quickly also save money, and that didn't happen. And we now find out that we need to spend more money on personnel in order to keep the German armed forces attractive. Just to give a few numbers, it is the goal of the latest reform of the German armed forces, which is already the 6th reform of the German armed forces since the end of the Cold War, to have 185,000 troops, military troops, plus 55,000 civilian employees. And according to some estimates, in order to sustain this workforce of military and civilian personnel, you will have to hire 20,000 new people every year. And in order to have a choice so that you can select some of these people, you will have to have at least 60,000 applicants every year. And that means that you need to offer something, that you need to offer good pay and benefits, for instance. And the recent decisions or the recent plans of our defense minister, the so-called attractiveness law, I don't know, Attraktivitätsgesetz in German, is exactly an aim or is an attempt to address that challenge. But how do you do that if the overall defense budget remains constant and if at the same time there's an issue with German readiness and with German equipment? So that's a big challenge. And so my conclusion at that point, fourth point, is it has been a good sign that Germany didn't significantly reduce the defense budget, but it's probably not going to be enough to play a leadership role. So that brings me to my conclusion real quick. As I already said, we need to do, if the aim is for Germany to play a leadership role in multilateral defense cooperation, there has to be homework done. So on a strategic level, we need to translate our rhetoric about new responsibility into more specific, more operable, concrete actions. But also I think there has to be a clear understanding of the relevance of the defense political dimension in Germany itself. I feel that the debate about the German armed forces and the future of the German armed forces is very much treated as a management problem. So we need to hire more lawyers, we need to be more efficient in acquisition, then we will solve our problems. But I think the debate has to be broader and also more substantial, and we need to debate defense political issues really as a fundamental issue that also touches on our credibility within the NATO context. It's not just a management issue. And of course, more cohesion among the V4 countries would be very helpful to foster or to promote that German debate. As I said, defense expenditures matter, but of course the issue is not only to reach 2% defense expenditure in Germany. I don't think that's the major problem alone. But what is definitely true is that if we keep constant defense budgets while the costs, personnel costs and acquisition costs are rising, then Germany will face a strategic choice, and that is it has to either increase the budget, spend it more efficiently, or lower its ambitions in defense political terms. And I think that in Germany, or the German government and German society at large has not yet made that strategic choice. So it's still open. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Marco, for offering insight into German defense policy and its challenges. The last speaker at this panel, before we open the general debate, is Marcin Terlikowski, speaking about Polish view or perspectives.
Thank you, Ondřej. It's a pleasure to be here and speak on this panel, but also it's a challenge because I'm the very last person and I have a feeling that everything has been said. So copying a little bit what the other speakers did, I would like to speak more about the Polish outlook on the security and defense cooperation in the region of Central and Eastern Europe. And I would like to start by the very core issue which is in the title of our panel and the subtitle of the whole symposium, so the Ukrainian crisis and its aftermath. Or we should rather maybe say the Russian-Ukrainian war or conflict, if you wish. Well, just briefly, what did the conflict change? Because everyone is agreeing now that the security environment in which we are now operating, I mean, which we exist in, is a post-conflict security environment. It's not as it used to. It's not any longer as it used to be after the 1989. For the first time after the Cold War, and in fact for the first time after the end of the Second World War, one state violated the borders and the sovereignty of another state, seized part of its territory and waged an aggressive separationist conflict within the other states. So this is a decisive moment in the post-Cold War or even the post-Second World War history of Europe. So there is no easy, if at all, return to the business as usual in European security environment. But what are the practical changes? Well, let's look at the multilateral level, of the level of the institutions in Europe. At the level of NATO, Jan has portrayed the decisions of the Wales Summit. So to sum them up, NATO, because of the conflict, the Central and Eastern European members managed to start, and I'm carefully using these words, to start reorientation of NATO more towards collective defense. For the last 20-25 years, NATO has been preoccupied with crisis management and was developing both the doctrine, training, capabilities, operational concepts with regards to crisis management operations. It started slowly in 2008 with the contingency plans, but there was the steadfast exercise, the very first exercise, which involved Article 5 and territorial defense scenario, but hadn't it been not for the crisis, hadn't it been no Russian-Ukrainian crisis, then there wouldn't be that easy, if it were easy at all, it wouldn't be possible to have this reorientation of NATO towards collective defense. And the decisions have been made, but of course the implementation is another issue, and it's the biggest challenge now. Looking at the European Union, the crisis has shown that the two things: that we are deeply divided when it comes to the threat perceptions and basically the perception of Russia and the Russian place in European politics, in European security environment, that the countries have very significant trade and political relations and interest vis-à-vis Russia and do not want to jeopardize them. And this is bad because it shows that it will be very difficult to have a coherent policy towards Russia on the part of the EU, and Russia as a strategic partner of the EU will be again a partner of the chosen group of states which have kind of privileged relations with Russia, and there will be not a single Brussels voice, so to say, in Russia. But on the other hand, the European Union, quite surprisingly, I would add, managed to agree on sanctions. So unlike in the case, for example, of Kosovo in 2008, where the EU agreed not to agree, and some states acknowledged and recognized the newly created states, some did not. Then in case of Russia, and for different reasons, but I would say even if the weakest reason was to preserve, as István said, to preserve the European Union unity and solidarity, we managed to do this. So the EU made a move which some say Russia was not anticipating will happen. So even if we are divided, then there is at least some solidarity, if you wish, in the EU. The question is, however, what next? How long the sanctions regime will be sustained? And what is needed to keep EU countries together despite their clearly different interests and perception of Russia? And the third institution, European, if you wish, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. Well, the crisis allowed, I would say, a resurrection of this institution, and it went out of the shadows quite suddenly. Of course, I know that some of you, and particularly the diplomats or academics who work closely with OSCE, would not agree. Would say that the OSCE has been doing a good job for years after 1989, or after it was transformed to an organization in 1995. But practically, in the wider policy, let's say, world, the OSCE was almost non-existent and was not paid political attention enough. But now it is in the forefront because of a German initiative, because of the initiative of Minister Steinmeier to have the special operation, special mission there, and it has prospects to do more there in Ukraine. So in these three institutions, the outcome of the crisis was quite dramatic, I would say. And these three institutions will not easily come back to the state of politics in which they used to operate before the crisis. But what does it mean for the region and for the cooperation with Germany? It means that the region. No, let's start differently. Central and Eastern Europe is because of the geopolitical reasoning is the flank, is the region in which the question of Russian place and the place of Russia, so to say, in European politics and European security architecture has practical implications. For southern countries, for countries of the Mediterranean, both EU and NATO members, it's a political issue. For this region, it's a practical and geopolitical issue. What leads me to saying that we need very much action to work on what we have now in all these three organizations, all these different levels of policy in Europe, to assure our shared interest here. And again, starting with NATO. As Jan said, the biggest challenge now is the implementation of the Readiness Action Plan. And from the Polish perspective, of course, the key interest is to sustain the increased presence of NATO assets on the territory of the Central and Eastern Europe as long as it requires, but in Polish reasoning, the situation will require that until Russia changes its policy towards the neighborhood. So it's not by the end of 2015. It's quite unlikely that Russia will come back to the democratic policy in the neighborhood. Quite contrary. it is a wide assessment, widely shared assessment in Poland that Russia would rather continue to exert influence on the countries of the post-Soviet space and will try to adapt different tools of coercive policy towards its neighbors. And if yes, then the sustained NATO presence of NATO assets in this area of Europe is needed, and it is not a given. It is up to the region, it is up to the Baltic states, to the Visegrad, to Germany to do it. And why Germany is important here? Let me start from, let me show you just two levels, the political and the military level. On a military level, if we speak either about Article 5 full-fledged conflict with Russia, which is unlikely, and this is something what in my country is shared. This belief is also widely shared, that if we may speak about different provocations on the part of Russia, about hybrid tactics, but not an open conflict, not a third world war. That's for sure. But if we even speak about these provocations, about particularly the Baltic states, which are in fact the crisis scenario and the question, what will the region, what will NATO, Germany, US, France do if there is a military provocation in the Baltics? If we speak about this kind of, let's say, above the threshold of war provocations and crises, then the German military might is the closest and the decisive one in the opening phases of the crisis. So it will be about the German capability to help the allies of NATO fight with in case of a crisis. Of course, I'm speaking about below the level of war, below the threshold of war situations in which some German reinforcement, some capabilities sent, some military assets sent to the region of the crisis may play a decisive role in both complicating the military calculations, the operational calculations of the opponent, and also sending a political signal that NATO is cohesive. And because of the size of the German military, because of the fact that it has a full spectrum of capabilities, Germany is the decisive power in the Central and Eastern Europe region. And that's a simple truth which everyone has to acknowledge. On a political level, Germany, of course, enjoys unique relationship with Russia. A relationship which is a bit strained now, and I can see from what I can see in Berlin, it's being refought, and maybe it will be redesigned, we'll see. But definitely it will not be the same as it used to be. But at the same time, because of the economic relations between Germany and Russia, and the traditionally very important place of Germany in the Russian-European policy, so it's a vice versa, so to say, relations, Central and Eastern Europe needs to have Germany on board when thinking of a common NATO or common EU policy towards Russia. Germany is simply the partner to talk to, because with not being on the same page with Germany, or maybe let's put it differently, there can be no single EU or NATO, a coherent EU or NATO joint policy towards Russia if Germany is somehow absent from the consensus, because of the weight of Germany to Russia and in Central and Eastern Europe. So we have both military and political level. Now coming to my concluding thought about practical cooperation. Definitely, the chances, as again referring to Jan said, the chances are that the implementation of the Readiness Action Plan and other elements, reassurance elements, including exercises and permanent rotational stationing of troops and the stretching, because it's not everything is not the same. The spear force is different from permanent rotational presence. This is a different tools which were agreed in Wales. It creates many venues in which Germany and the region can cooperate. The framework nation concept as well, but here I would be very careful, because again, from the perspective of Poland, it's more about reassurance and NATO presence in this region than about investing time and money for deployable capabilities for crisis management operations, which does not mean that Poland will stop being involved in crisis management operations, but it has already lost priority, and the priority will remain low for Poland because of natural consequences of Polish geopolitical position and its close and the fact that it's so close to a possible regions of destabilization because of Russian policy, so to say. So because basically we are the eastern flank of NATO, so it is natural. It would be illogical to expect that Poland would look at the crisis management as a top priority after Ukrainian crisis, and everywhere. You just have to. Our Polish partners have to understand it, and I think they do. So framework nation concept less, but definitely the implementation of the Wales decisions with regards to reactions. This is the venue for cooperation. And just to say one word about EU, as the crisis has elevated the importance of NATO, but also shown that EU can be and can build solidarity even despite the differences in interest, then there is one area which may benefit very heavily from a joint V4 and possibly Germany, or the V4 plus Weimar initiative, so the CSDP. The common security and defense policy its importance has been drastically reduced over the last years. The military component of CSDP pursued so heavily turned out not to be that effective, precisely because of the lack of money and lack of political will to deploy, for example, battle groups. So battle groups it's good that we will have a Visegrad for battle group. It's nice to hear that Germany and Czech Republic will also be in the other one, but these forces have never been used, and it is unlikely that they will be used in the future. We need to, as European Union, to rethink tools we use within our external relations, and maybe to decide if we really want to pursue military elements in CSDP, if they are not effective, or maybe specialize more in civil military cooperation and in civilian capabilities. And basically the CSDP needs a new both political and practical opening in terms of political impulse to develop, to abandon, to stop with the past practices which has been effective only when you look at the numbers of documents created in Brussels. And on the political and on the practical level, initiative which will prioritize interests, put together the tools and allow us to jointly use tools like official development assistance, presence of ES delegations, CSDP operations, and technical projects of the Commission. So all the instrumentarium the EU has to use it to stabilize the countries of the neighborhood. And this will be a great task for the next HRVP, Ms. Mogherini. And I can see no reason why the V4 and the Weimar, or in the format of V4 plus Weimar, could not agree on this kind of a political initiative, which would help to streamline this policy. Because the EU, and finally, another lesson learned from the Russian-Ukrainian crisis is that the EU has underestimated its strategic gravity. It engaged in a geopolitical game with Russia by offering Ukraine the DCFTA and the chance for, let's say, civilizational breakthrough and a quantum leap in terms of economic and social development, but it did not foresee the gravity of this decision. And no one assumed that Russia will overreact. So we can see that EU has bigger significance and is considered more important by external actors than by the member states. What means that if we only manage to put in line the instruments we have, the EU can finally stop making mistakes in its neighborhood, which is now burning from Ukraine through Syria, or what used to be Syria and Iraq, through Egypt, Libya, with Tunisia being one good exception from that practice. And again, a political Weimar Visegrad initiative in regard to this area would be much welcome, and this is what I think also think tanks should contribute to in developing. Thank you very much. Sorry for exceeding time a little bit.
Thank you very much, Marcin, and all the speakers for their initial remarks, which I think could be characterized as engaging in constructive criticism. I would now like to open the floor for Q&As. We've got roughly 15 minutes or so. So please, if you have a question or a comment, raise your hand and identify yourselves. Please.
Vladimir Handel, Institute of International Relations. Perhaps I start. Two questions. One is to Marco Overhaus. You indicated that these limitations, restrictions for use of force and for the active military policy on Germany is being tightened. Could you elaborate on it a bit? Is it linked with, is this notion linked with the fact that Germany is trying to mediate rather than to build up its own military posture? And we all know that Russia now is very sensitive about the hard power sort of increasing on the West. So is this the reason? Is it the reason that is the reason the fact that Angela Merkel is rather a crisis manager than leader in the traditional sense, and so is it about German politics really losing interest in military affairs? We've noticed that there is actually a very limited capacity in German Bundestag, German Parliament, to discuss on expert level Ukraine and defense issues. So where is it that this limitation comes from? And then to the some of the Visegrad panelists, I don't know who wants to pick up the issue, but it seems to me that Visegrad and Germany always worked well only when the Visegrad was the initiator. Germany never came to Visegrad to engage and to start leading some kind of activity. So we are back to the normality. It always has been only the Visegrad which invited Germany to work on internal security issues, on environment issues, whatever. So actually, shouldn't the initiative and some kind of project and some kind of investment, political as well as financial, come from Visegrad if we want to work with Germany? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Marco, would you like to start?
I think, as I said, I mean, when I talk about restrictions, it's basically, it starts with how we debate defense policy in Germany and what we as Germans, as the German government, supported by society, would in principle be willing to contemplate. It's not necessarily, about German troops being deployed everywhere. It's just the debate, how we frame it on a political level. And I've said that, I mean, it's been a long-term process. After the end of the Cold War, with the beginning of the Balkan Wars, all this long-term process where Germany has, as a pressure, also pressurized by NATO and EU allies to ease existing legal but also political restrictions. So I mentioned the three dimensions: geography, timing, so how quickly German forces should be able to be deployed elsewhere, and scope, so functional scope. And I see that, given the debate that we had about Libya, about Mali, about Syria, and other crisis areas, and Eastern Ukraine now, there's a narrowing down of the debate in terms of what is possible in Germany. And it's not necessarily, or it's not mostly a legal debate. I mean, legally nothing really changed. German forces can be deployed for collective or individual self-defense, even without the parliament's approval, but they need parliamentary approval when it is out-of-area missions. So that didn't really change at all. But we don't, for instance, debate about German combat troops anymore. To deploy German combat troops or in a combat role is totally taken out of the picture. So it is extremely, I think it almost has to be a direct attack at least on Germany and probably also on a NATO country with tank divisions that would, clearly trigger a German willingness to deploy combat troops. I mean, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but the deployment of combat troops is extremely unlikely under current circumstances, be it for crisis management or be it for other scenarios. And that is a political phenomenon. There's a big tendency now in German defense policy to emphasize building partnerships, enhance and enable initiative, and so forth. So probably preparing others to secure their own neighborhood, but not necessarily preparing for direct interventions. And this is a debate I see. We have been debating in Germany whether this has been linked to a specific foreign minister, Minister Westerwelle, our previous foreign minister, who was more skeptical about military deployments, but I see it as a longer-term development. Reasons for these are hard to, domestic politics definitely plays a role. So because of the experience in Afghanistan, there's much more skepticism in Germany about the deployment of armed forces. And interestingly, it has been a single event that has really had a very tremendous impact, and that was the Kunduz bombing in 2009, where we also had a film broadcasted on TV. We had a big debate about this when a German officer was ordering airstrikes that killed a lot of civilians in Afghanistan. And that is actually, you can see it in the opinion polls, that this was a point where support for German combat role elsewhere has been eroding. And this is a longer term trend. And that's basically what I wanted to say about the restrictions on German military deployments.
Okay, thank you. On the second question related to Visegrad, Dušan, Fischer, and then Jireš will say a few words.
Thank you very much for the question, and I totally agree that the initiative should be on the side of V4, because, as I already mentioned, Germany was very vocal during the 1990s, and for me it was like they paid a lot of political capital to bring the region to stability, political, economically wise, and after 2004 it was pretty much up to us to do something with it, to do something with the relationship, and we failed at this miserably, if I can be open about this. And I spoke to a high official, Czech official at Brussels at the NATO mission right before the summit in June, and I asked him about the common V4 strategy for the future in the light of the crisis in Ukraine, the Russian aggression and so on. He said there's none, and there doesn't need to be. And that was pretty much the end of the debate. So, and I totally disagree with this, and I think there should be one. And this is what I already mentioned in my speech, that the V4 is looking for its purpose, and I agree with, I don't know who said it, I don't want to misquote, but to get back to the roots and to start taking V4 as platform and bringing up projects that can be worked with Germans. But I totally agree that the initiative should be on our side. Germany has a lot to do in its region, and the role of the leader is not to bring up something, it's just to lead the debate. And thanks.
Thank you. Just very briefly, I would like to perhaps go back to my original point and emphasize it, or to put it in using different words. We can look at regional defense cooperation from two perspectives, or actually we can identify two types of benefits stemming from regional defense cooperation. The first one is, of course, the straightforward one, meaning the regional defense cooperation as a tool to increase our defense capabilities. Very practical and very straightforward. But of course, there is another potential benefit of regional defense cooperation, and that is cooperation per se, meaning defense cooperation as a vehicle or as a tool to achieve something else, or also to achieve something else. And in the current political and security situation in Europe, regional defense cooperation involving the V4 countries as well as Germany can be turned into one of the tools of disciplining the V4 countries, as I said, into the EU and NATO mainstream. And when we take this perspective, it is suddenly very obvious that Germany must play a prominent role in this, because it is in Germany's very interest. If Germany wants to be one of the leaders of Europe, which I believe it wants, then it must not be shy of actually leading in the area of regional defense cooperation as well. You asked a question whether the initiative shouldn't be on the part of V4. Of course. From whatever direction the initiative comes, it's good, but if actually there is no coherent, coordinated V4 initiative, then Germany must take the initiative in its own hands and be active for the sake of among other things, apart from developing defense capabilities in a regional fashion, to actually keep the V4 countries on the right orbit. And actually, going back to what Dušan said a few minutes ago, I'm not sure whether actually we in Central Europe nowadays are not in the same situation, or whether we are not back in 1995 again. Perhaps
it was you who said that we should go back to the purpose. Yeah, I agree.
Perhaps we are. Perhaps we are. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. We've got time for one short question. I see a hand raised there, and I apologize. Well, there was another and another. So if you are really brief, we can take all three, and then the speakers will address whichever one they like. So please, we'll start with the gentleman over there.
Thank you, gentlemen. Hope I can hear. Probably the most effective application of a military alliance structure is not that of being a combat or a war-fighting force, but as a deterrent force. I mean, the best deterrent force, the most effective force that you can have, and the least expensive one, is one that you never have to use because of all the other costs, whether it's economic or lives or whatever. Naturally, no force or alliance can have any deterrence value, though, unless you have an explicit understanding that you're willing to commit that force or use that force. And I think right now is what we have, at least in my belief, is a perception from one major likely adversary, Russia, nowadays, that there is no real commitment to using or deploying force, therefore it has no deterrence value whatsoever. Perhaps that's a miscalculation on Mr. Putin's part. Perhaps it's not. Maybe he's right, maybe he's wrong. But I think we probably need to have some sort of stated policy, really more than just stated policy, stronger and as forceful as Article 5, that if somebody's attacked, something's going to happen back. I appreciate your thoughts on the matter. Thank you.
Thank you. I saw another hand over there, I thought, and then over there. But we can start with you because I don't see the hand over here anymore.
Thank you. Just a quick question. Vlada Bilčík from the Slovak Foreign Policy Association. Anyone who picks it up. But I mean, the title of the panel is The Crisis in Ukraine, the Security Aspects of Defense Cooperation between Germany and the V4. And my question is quite simply, all of you broadly
So I can imagine that when we talk about binding Germany and for countries closer in defense and security area, it doesn't necessarily need to be always in a group of 5 countries, meaning the 4 countries and Germany. But we talk about practical projects involving Germany and the Czech Republic and Poland, for example, or Germany and the Czech Republic and Slovakia. Or we can speak of bilateral projects between the 4 countries and Germany. I think we should approach this problem of Germany plus for defense cooperation in this flexible and rather promiscuous way. Because otherwise there is not big probability of reaching tangible progress. We would restrict our thinking and our policies just strictly to the V4 plus Germany format. Thank you.
Two real quick remarks. First one was brought up about the question being raised about deterrence. I find that NATO's response to the Ukraine crisis has been relatively conventional in military terms. So we've witnessed the decision to create a rapid reaction force. There has been the deployment of troops, so the tripwire logic still applies, and the prepositioning of military equipment. But we still didn't grasp the idea of what deterrence really means in this new strategic context. Last today talked about the hybrid warfare challenge, so everything that is below the threshold of open military assault. So what does deterrence mean in this context? Specifically also, even more so we talk about nuclear weapons. What's the use of that? I have no answer, specifically not in the last minute of that kind of thing, but that's something I think we need to address. The deterrence still means. One final very quick remark, I wanted to reply to what Jan said about the framework nation concept being a useful tool internally in Germany to convince the German public to do more, to be more actively involved in defense policy. I'm a bit skeptical about it because the framework nations concept is really debated in a very narrow circle of experts. It's nothing that would involve larger public audience. So I'm just very skeptical that this concept can serve that purpose.
Thank you. We will now take a coffee break. After the break, there will be 2 panels examining in detail some more practical aspects of possible increased cooperation either by